I've been asked to speak about the politics of homosexuality, which is, as Steve pointed out in his very kind and generous introduction, the subject of an article I wrote in 1993 and was summarized really in my book, Virtually Normal. It's now 2010. And it was interesting, having been asked to speak about this, to go over the arguments that I made then and see how they've held up and whether they still apply and whether I still believe all of them. And what I tried to do in that essay was to actually, instead of getting into this extraordinary fight in which one side calls the other perverts and the other side calls the other bigots, to actually try and deconstruct it a little, to talk about various ways of understanding and thinking about homosexuality. And I divided, and there are many, many different ways of doing so, but I decided, for the sake of clarity and brevity, to divide it into 4 categories. 4 different kinds of politics about homosexuality. And tackled why I believe every single one of them was wrong. Those politics of homosexuality I called Prohibitionism, Liberationism, Conservatism, and Liberalism. And the arguments I made in the late 80s and early 90s came from a young gay man trying to make sense of his own life and the world he was living in, and try to make sense, logical, rational sense, of the discourse around this extraordinarily fraught topic. It remains, of course, incredibly fraught today. Intense, emotional, disturbing, upsetting, the sort of red-hot center of a culture war in which many people's lives are discussed and debated. I want to try and, tonight, diffuse that, to calm that, and to try and think rather than feel about this topic. And I ask you tonight also to help me do that, because there is so much emotion legitimately about this subject that thinking is sometimes hard. The first concept of politics of homosexuality, prohibitionism, has actually had a much stronger and longer life than I expected it would back in the early 1990s. Prohibitionism was, of course, the absolute consensus in America and indeed most of the world for the vast majority of the existence of humankind. It is still the overwhelming politics for the overwhelming number of homosexual men and lesbian women and bisexual and transgendered people in the world. Today we see in Africa a rather terrifying movement to criminalize, imprison, and execute homosexuals, fomented in the United States, created by the American religious right. In my lifetime, when I grew up, when I was born in my own country, homosexuality was illegal. It was criminal. People were jailed. People lived in fear. Today, they still live in fear. Not really in many parts of this country, but certainly in large parts of the Middle East, in vast amounts of Africa and Asia, where people today, even in places we think of as relatively civilized, suffer tremendous suffering because of this. In Iran, young gay men are hanged in public because they are homosexual. And this is based on religious doctrine, first of all. It's based in this country on the Bible. And I think it is silly to deny the fact that the Bible does explicitly condemn homosexual sex. I'm not one of these people trying to pretend it doesn't. Leviticus is very clear on this matter. Romans seems to be pretty clear that it's not kosher I hope that isn't going to be interpreted as anti-Semitic. Does this work today as a politics? Does biblical literalism, the appeal to the Bible, which in fact is one of the dominant themes of the religious right? It was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. You've heard these slogans. The Bible is clear. This is the Word of God. We must take the Bible literally seriously. Well, my response to that is simply this. Leviticus is clear. A man shall not lie down with a man as he does with a woman. But it is also clear that the penalty is execution. It is also clear that you shall not mix one fabric with another fabric, in which case the religious right should be campaigning to shut down Bloomingdale's. It should, if biblical literalism is the actual argument, be arguing for the execution of homosexuals as real fundamentalist regimes do. So I'm sorry, but already the prohibitionists are engaging in incoherence. Either the Bible is literally true and is the commitment to be enforced, or it isn't. They're telling us it isn't, because they don't support the execution of homosexuals. Then you come to a much more sophisticated argument. And this argument comes from the Catholic tradition of natural law. What it says is that human beings are naturally designed by God to be heterosexual. In fact, at some level, homosexuals do not really exist. We are all heterosexuals, but some choose to engage in behavior that is unnatural, that is against the way God made us and the way nature designed us. And this revolt against nature is the argument against homosexuality. The legal framework for criminalizing homosexuality was often referred to in English law and indeed in early American law as crimes against nature. This is a core element. And why is this a core element? Because when you ask them, it is that sexuality and sexual acts are by nature supposed to procreate and create life. And a man and a woman can do this, but obviously a man and a man for biological reasons and a woman for biological reasons cannot create new life. And that therefore the act, the entire purpose of sexuality is being perverted, literally, away from its natural end. Therefore, we are not, it is claimed, bigoted about homosexuals or stigmatizing homosexuals. We are simply saying that by understanding the nature of human beings, the act of sexuality in this sense is clearly contrary to what every human being would clearly understand. And this is the other critical argument of natural law. Natural law does not appeal the way that Protestant fundamentalism does to the Bible in a literal sense. It says and makes an argument that these arguments that it's making are obvious and self-evident to anybody with reason. That you do not need to have revelation or even faith to accept the obvious, reasonable nature of this condition and of this argument.